When most people think of Chernobyl, they think of Ukraine. The reactor, the exclusion zone, the empty streets of Pripyat frozen in time. But the worst of Chernobyl never happened in Ukraine. It happened to the country next door. A country most people couldn't find on a map. A country that got 70% of the radiation. A country whose people are still dying from a disaster they didn't cause, in a place nobody talks about. This is the story of Belarus and how a single mistake just over the border killed a nation slowly for 40 years. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. The world knows the rest. The fire, the evacuation, the Soviet Union's desperate attempts to hide what had happened. But here is what almost nobody mentions. Chernobyl sits less than 10 kilometers from the Belarusian border. And on the night of the explosion, the wind was blowing north. Within hours, a radioactive cloud the size of several countries crossed into Belarus. By the next morning, roughly 70% of all the radiation released by the disaster had landed not on Ukraine, but on Belarus. A quarter of the entire country was contaminated. Farmland, forests, rivers, villages, schools, homes, and nobody told the people. The Soviet government delayed the warnings. Children went to school the next day under skies full of radiation. Farmers worked their fields. People drank contaminated milk. Children played in the rain for days, for weeks in some areas. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late. Over 470 villages in Belarus were eventually abandoned, bulldozed, buried under earth and concrete to try to seal the radiation underground. Entire communities erased from the map. Cemeteries left behind because moving the dead was deemed too dangerous. 138,000 people were permanently evacuated from their homes. Most of them never returned. Many were never compensated. Some were resettled in areas that turned out to be just as contaminated. The medical disaster that followed has no parallel in modern history. Thyroid cancer in Belarusian children increased by over 2,000%. 2,000%. Doctors who had never seen the disease in children before were suddenly diagnosing it in toddlers. Babies were born with deformities the medical literature had no name for. Entire towns saw their birth rates collapse as women became too sick or too scared to have children. And the contamination never went away. The radioactive elements released at Chernobyl, cesium, strontium, plutonium, have half-lives measured in decades and centuries. The forests of southern Belarus are still poisoned today. The wild mushrooms and berries still set off Geiger counters. The wild boar that roam the contaminated zones still cannot be eaten. There is an entire region of Belarus, the size of a small country, that humans cannot safely live in, and there will not be in our lifetimes, or our children's lifetimes, or their children's lifetimes either. And here is the part that makes it worse. The Belarusian government, under decades of authoritarian rule, has spent years trying to bury the story. Researchers studying the long-term health effects have been arrested. Doctors who spoke publicly about cancer rates lost their jobs. International journalists have been deported. The official position is that Belarus has recovered, that the affected zones are safe, that the disaster is in the past. The people living there know that's not true. Their children are sick. Their land is still poisoned. Their homes still sit empty along roads nobody drives anymore. And the world remembers Chernobyl as a Ukrainian story. It wasn't. It was a Belarusian one. It still is. A country that didn't build the reactor, didn't run the reactor, didn't even know the reactor was failing until it was already over, and paid the highest price anyway. There is a saying in Belarus that the country has two histories, the one before April 1986 and the one after. The one before is a Soviet republic with farms, forests and small towns. The one after is a wound that never closed. The reactor at Chernobyl is now sealed under a giant steel sarcophagus. The disaster is officially over. The Soviet Union that built the plant doesn't even exist anymore, but the country it poisoned does, and it is still paying. If you want more stories about the places and people the world isn't paying attention to, subscribe, because there are a lot more of them.